You'd think that stripped down as far as this, the body couldn't really hold any more surprises for us, but it did. Now, this piece, this is the pressure plate. You notice there are two, it's extended at this end. You've got a tongue that sticks out. That tongue is supposed to fall here, where the sprocket shaft goes, and the tongue would make sure that the film is held down firmly over the sprockets. Here it's the other way around, so it's over the film cassette end. I'm not even very confident that you could close the door correctly on that. This is just held in springs with slots at each end. And this should have been this way around. So I'll see if I can get that back in position. Well, I won't bother actually, because I'm going to be dealing with more work on that door shortly. But there you go. So that someone's had the pressure plate out and put it back in upside down. However, I have the body stripped right down. The mechanical components will all have to go into the ultrasonic cleaner. They are very, very dirty, covered in grit and dust and dried grease. The struts are here, they're not looking any prettier. But all these parts will need to be cleaned. And I'm going to have to do something about this. And that's for another day. Now the hinge pins, the hinges on the Retina IIa, they're not screwed to the body, they're riveted to the body and to the door. So to take the door off the back, really I've got to drive that pin out of the door. So I've got a little punch here. It'll get that started, and probably I can pull it the rest of the way out with pliers. It certainly doesn't do my punches any good. Let me just give that a little straighten up. I'll pull that pin out and that'll release the back. That's how you do it with a Retina IIa. Okay, let's skin the warthog. See if I can get this leather off here in one piece. It's thin and it's fairly brittle. Alright, well I've got it off at the end. Let's see if it'll peel back. I'm peeling this back slowly. I want to make sure that I don't miss any event where the leather delaminates on the edge and then tears across. So you need to take this very slowly. If you see the leather delaminate, then you need to stop and use your scalpel and scrape down underneath it to free it from the camera back. Right, I'm right at the end of the back cover there, right on the corner. Now you could stop there, because when you re-glue leather, you'll always end up with a line where the gluing process started. If it's right on the edge, you'll never see it. It disappears. What I'm concerned about is the state of the leather here. Zoom out, but it's very dark here today. Yeah, what I'm concerned about is the state of the leather at this point. And though it may be very thinned out, skived, and it may tear easily there. But given the state of this door, I really want all the leather off there because I'd like to repaint it. Right, so it's off the door itself, now it's right down on the hinge. As I say, the leather may be thinned out or skived right at the edge here, and the adhesive will behave differently over different metals. So here it's over chromed brass, and it may well be stuck firmer than it would be on the aluminium. So I'm using my scalpel to scrape down between the leather and keeping the scalpel right down on the metal, because the leather's likely to be very thin and fragile on that edge. That's it. As you can see the disease symptoms there. This is nasty green scunch. This is a corrosion product. And you get it where there are dissimilar metals. The green colour almost certainly has to do with the copper content of the brass rivets. All that filth has to come off, both the door and the leather itself. Where that build-up of scunges stretch the leather, it is very, very difficult to get leather to go back where it came from. The fibres only have a certain amount of elasticity, and they've probably been stretched beyond the point where they can, where they're even intact probably. The fibres are probably torn. So there's no danger of things returning to the shape that they once were. And here I'm just scraping off the worst of that. That was just a scalpel blade deciding to pop. So I was being too hard on it. Right, so there's my leather. I'll need to clean that. I'll start with a bit of naphtha. And though that green stuff is a waxy sort of a substance, very likely chemically you would call it a soap. I'll get as much of that off as I can, and I'll probably use another solvent to remove even more. Now, leather can be made to shrink to some extent by the localised application of heat. So if you had a fine nozzle on a heat gun, for example, you may be able to get the leather to shrink back. I don't, unfortunately. My days of plastic welding are long since gone, and I don't have that tool. I think paradoxically, because of the size of these bumps, they were not sharp peaks, and so the amount of stretching that's gone on is probably not as severe as it might have been. There's reasonable likelihood that those bumps will flatten out quite well. Of course, the embossed pattern has been stretched too, and that's likely to always, where the bumps have fallen on the embossed pattern, it's always likely to be a problem. I'll get rid of the worst of this. Of course, those rivets are tubular at the ends, so their little hollows there are filled with that stuff. Just see if I can get that out. There's a bit hiding under the glue there. Let's have that out. Just demonstrates how many rivets we used to assemble the back on one of these cameras. And of course at the hinge here. course, because I'm going to repaint this door to deal with these stripped body edges, the edges there, I'll be doing a bit more degreasing work on this. I should be able to see the back of the last of this green rubbish. That's pretty good. Now I'll need to do more preparation work on that door before it's ready for painting. I need to clean away all this filthy mess first from my work surface, otherwise nothing will get done. The day is young, but there won't be an awful lot of high speed work going on today. I had my second Pfizer vaccine injection yesterday and my arm is sore. Fortunately, apart from that, I'm not bad. So I'm just lubricating the struts here using some molybdenum paste on that spring and shaft there for the shutter release. And the slots at the back, I'll lubricate those with a bit of synthetic grease. Apologise for the quality of the picture, it's dark here, it's not exactly dawn, it's considerably later than that, but it's a dirty dark winter's day. Right, that looks good. Let's put some molybdenum paste. I'll just rub some on the shaft here that the shutter release mechanism runs on. It doesn't need much, you just need to leave a slight mark. Put that spring in place. Now the transfer shaft, I'll tip that around so you can see where we're going. This is the shaft that runs from the cocking rack at the back of the camera towards the front of the camera. So I'll just put some synthetic grease on that gear on the end. Put that into place. That often has to tuck down under the last pleat of the bellows, so be aware of that. There's a little bracket that holds that in place. This little one, we'll lower that down into position. Of course it's not playing the game, that's nothing unusual. That sits up against that top rail. Can you see any of that? You can see none of it. That little bracket, here you can just about see it, down here, tucks up against that top rail. And then I can swing the struts into position. So making sure I've got this oriented the right way and this oriented the right way, so the short end goes over that shutter release shaft and the struts are in the erected position. Slide that over the shutter release part, squeeze in the struts to get them past that little bracket we put in at the top, and the one that's easily dislodged, and the release for the front of the camera. That looked like that worked. Now at the top I can just see that bracket's trying to slide away into the distance, so I'll find a screw to go in there. One of these 4 black screws will be exceptionally ugly, the one that came from the base of the camera. 2 of them should be in quite good order from the film cassette well, and one of them should be a bit intermediate, and that will be the one from the top of the camera here. Just snug that up lightly. Now at the base of the camera there's a washer, a thick washer that acts as a spacer in the same relative position as that bracket at the top of the camera. So normally I slide it down inside there, then lift the struts lightly with the tip of my tweezers, and the washer drops down neatly into place, and there I can see it just about in position. Where was that ugly screw? It was that one. It's reasonably chewed up looking, that one, but it'll do the job. And it's under the leather, so yes, that's running. I'll just collapse these struts. And the other two screws go in here in the film cassette well. It's one of them. That's the other one. Okay, so there's 4 screws in position. I can tighten the 4 screws now, if I could see. That's our struts in place. Next thing I want to do is put the focus mount in there. So I'll just pull those struts into the upright position. And I have the focus mount here, all clean and ready for reassembly. So I'll support that with my finger from underneath, and there are 4 nickel plated screws that hold this in position. And when I started, these screws were loose. And you'll notice I'm supporting those struts from underneath the front standard with my finger, so that I'm not putting pressure on the struts which might bend them. The struts in this camera were pretty good. They needed very little in terms of attention in order to get them looking in the shape I would like them to look. Let's collapse this again, push that right down and tighten those 4 screws. With it in that position, I can put the 4 black screws through that hold the bellows to the back of the front standard. That one's picked up. That one's picked up. That one. That one has now. I'll just use a slightly larger screwdriver and tighten these up. You're trapping leather and felt, multiple layers of leather and felt in between the plate at the back and the front standard, so those screws don't do up hard like they would if you were just pulling up against metal. So don't overdo it, you'll only end up breaking the screws. So there's our struts back in, bellows back in place, and the focus mount ready for reassembly. Well, here I've got the outer and inner helical. They've been cleaned. I've checked the alignment here with my alignment marks, which were made when the front surfaces were level, and they're all good. And I know that I had 2 lines at the bottom, 1 at the top, so I know that it goes in this way. Let's get this seated in position. Let's check and see if this is smooth. I wouldn't say that was particularly smooth in its action. Now there's 2 possibilities there. One is that these posts are not especially well lined with these grooves, and the second is that this outer helical is actually rubbing on the housing, and that's the rough part. Now that moves freely enough, so it's not that. It's got to do with the alignment of those 2 posts. Just check there's no foreign bodies like grit, anything like that there. They've been cleaned, but they're awkward to get to behind there. Right, let me reassemble this. Start there. Where are we? Need to go back another 1 or 2 notches. Let's try there. Let me check that. I think that's right. Yeah, that's it. So that's the correct position. And this needs to be lubricated with some helical grease. So I'll run that most of the way out. I want to put a white in about 5 or 6 places around the outside. Whoops, that was clever. Now I've got to get it lined back up again. It won't be there. I've overshot. We want 1 more back the other way. That's correctly aligned again. Now where it runs on those little guide posts, I'll put a smear of this helical grease in there. Not because it particularly demands anything as clever as that, but just because that's what I've got in my hand. And then this goes on that way up. The retaining ring sits on here and holds down that focus helical, so I'll rub some helical grease around here. It doesn't need much, it's just a little smear. That's in place. Now we want 6 screws to hold that plate in place. Now my tweezers are gummy with something. Hopefully it's just grease. Let's get that screw started. Back that focus up to bring the inner helical slightly forward. If it's slightly back or even level with the outer helical, you may find that it's right back in the mount and locks up hard. And I want to reserve 4 good screws for holding the focus scale ring in position. Uglier screws can easily do this job, but they're only hanging on to the edge of the focus scale ring, so if you've got a screw that's got a damaged edge on it, it may not be useful holding the focus scale ring in position, but it'll be fine doing this job. I don't recall there being a problem with the screws in this particular camera, so I'll probably have no trouble. Okay, I've got the 6 in place. I'm supporting the front standard between finger and thumb. I'll knit those 6 screws up. That wasn't one of them. The focus scale ring can go in place. I've got my alignment marks that I made to align my focus scale ring with the outer helical, and there are probably 4 indentations where the screw heads bit into that focus scale ring too. I can certainly see one there, and I've got that centered up in the aperture. So these only need to be done up quite lightly really. If you over tighten these, all you'll achieve is that you'll distort the outer helical, and then it will bind, it won't move freely. If you think you're going to have to tighten it up more than that because otherwise it'll slip, then you probably haven't got the focus helical components clean and moving freely, and that's what you need to do first, not just tighten the screws up so that they won't slip when you're trying to force a reluctant focus helical to move. That's that. I'm just checking the action. That's nice and smooth. No serious resistance there. So here's the arm that couples to the rangefinder. This is fixed to the inner helical. Quite small screws, these two. And at the top there's a single screw that couples to our rangefinder. Normally I want to put a little bit of synthetic grease in that track so that that moves freely. And as the focus scale ring is moved at the front of the camera, you'll see that that post moves backwards and forwards down that slot. As the front of the camera is collapsed, let's see if we can do this. Get that shaft to come out where I want it to come out. That's better. So as the front of the camera collapses, you'll see that that thing disappears down the track. That's why that arm's hinged, and that allows you to stow the front of the camera. If it was just rigid, of course, when you close the front of the camera, that rod would have to poke out the back here somewhere. Okay, so that's that part. Now the next bit.